Have you ever felt in the quiet of your own becoming that you are somehow drifting away from the world you once knew? That the people who once made you laugh now seem to speak a different language, one that no longer touches the same notes in your heart? You see their faces, familiar and dear, yet something invisible stands between you, like a thin veil of glass. You're there, but not quite with them. You smile, but the smile belongs to an earlier version of you. This is what many call outgrowing people. But it's a rather curious phrase, isn't it? For it suggests that life is like a wardrobe, that we as persons slip in and out of sizes, shedding old clothes that no longer fit. Yet human relationships are not so easily discarded, and what we call outgrowing often comes with a strange ache, a sense of guilt, of loneliness, and even of arrogance. We wonder, who am I to feel apart from those who once felt like home? But here is the truth, or at least one of them. Growth is not a polite process. It is not a gentle, linear ascent up a staircase of enlightenment. Growth is more like a tree breaking through the pavement. It cracks what confines it. It uproots the ground around it. And yet, without that cracking, without that disturbance, there would be no new life. The danger, however, is not in the growing. The danger lies in mistaking separation for superiority, in thinking that because you've wandered further down the road, you've somehow transcended those who walk behind. For in the grand rhythm of existence, no one is really ahead or behind. We are all simply expressing different melodies of the same symphony, each finding our own timing, our own tempo. You see, what you call your growth is not your growth alone. It is the universe growing through you. The same sap that pushes through the trunk of the oak also flows through the smallest blade of grass. But the oak does not mock the grass for being small, nor does the grass resent the oak for being tall. Both are playing their part in the great ecological dance of being. So when you find yourself feeling apart, feeling misunderstood, remember, it is not a sign that you've gone too far. It is a sign that life is reshaping the pattern of your relationships as a river reshapes its banks. Sometimes it flows through familiar fields, sometimes it must carve new valleys. To resist that movement is to hold your breath against the tide. But it's understandable that we do, for human beings are creatures of connection. We ache for belonging as deeply as we ache for air. And when you begin to awaken, to see through certain illusions, it can feel as though you're standing on a different shore, calling out to those still on the other side. You want them to see what you see, to feel what you felt, but no amount of shouting will bridge that distance. Each soul must make the crossing in its own way, in its own time. That is perhaps the hardest part, to let others be exactly where they are, without trying to drag them into your vision. The very impulse to wake them up can become another form of ego, a subtle insistence that you know better. Yet the moment you make your growth into a badge, you've lost the spirit of it. For wisdom is not a ladder to climb above others. It is the humility to see that there was never anywhere to climb to. Now, this sense of outgrowing is not limited to people. It also happens with places, habits, ideas, and identities. You may find yourself suddenly alien in your own home, your own job, your own body of beliefs. You may sit in the same chair, walk the same streets, and yet feel as though life has quietly changed its flavor. The world no longer tastes the same, and you cannot pretend that it does. This is what mystics called the dark night of the soul. Not a darkness of evil, but of transition. The cocoon is dark before the wings unfold. You cannot hatch yourself without first dissolving what you were. And so, for a time, you may feel painfully alone, misunderstood, misplaced. You may even long to go back, to shrink yourself to fit the old pattern, to laugh at the old jokes, to believe again in the old illusions. But the river only flows one way, and if you try to paddle backward, you'll only exhaust yourself. So, what can one do? One must learn to sit in the discomfort of transformation, to see that loneliness is not the absence of connection, but the process of being reconnected on a deeper level. You are not being abandoned by others. You are being invited into a broader intimacy with life itself. The caterpillar cannot imagine the sky until its body dissolves into it. And so too, when you feel that ache of separation, realize that something in you is being unmade, so that something vaster can be revealed. But let us not romanticize it. To outgrow people you love can break your heart. To realize that certain conversations no longer feed you, that certain environments drain your spirit, can feel like betrayal. You will want to hold on. You will want to make them understand. Yet sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to let the distance be, to let life breathe between you. Perhaps they will meet you again, further along the path. Perhaps not. But in truth, no one is ever truly lost to you. For in the deeper sense, There are no separate beings at all. There is only the eternal dance of form and formlessness appearing as you and them, only to remind itself, through longing and through loss, that it was never divided to begin with. And maybe this is what it really means to outgrow others. Not to move beyond them, but to realize there was never anyone to outgrow. Only life, endlessly unfolding, meeting itself in countless disguises. But of course, this is easier said than done, for when you walk into a room where no one understands what you've become, the silence can be deafening. You begin to wonder if perhaps you've taken a wrong turn, if wisdom was worth the price of alienation. And this is where we must go deeper, into the heart of that silence, into the strange loneliness that comes when your inner world no longer fits the outer one. When silence greets you where laughter once lived, you begin to sense that transformation always demands a shedding. You can no longer wear the same conversations like old coats. They itch. They no longer fit the weather inside you. You see the world differently now, not because you've become superior, but because you've become transparent to something deeper. You begin to hear the hum beneath all the noise, that subtle vibration of being which runs through every voice, every movement, every breath. And when you hear it, it changes everything. You can no longer participate in the game of pretense, the endless chatter of who's right, who's wrong, who's winning, who's failing. You see that the whole thing was a dance, and everyone was playing their role perfectly, even in their confusion. But knowing this does not always make you comfortable. In fact, awakening can make you terribly tender. You begin to feel too much, the beauty and the sorrow of things both at once. The laughter of a child and the suffering of a stranger move through you with equal vividness. The walls between yourself and the world thin out until you are left naked before the raw pulse of existence. That is the paradox of growing in consciousness. It does not lift you above life. It immerses you more completely within it, and that immersion can be overwhelming. You may find yourself yearning for simpler days, days when your desires were clearer, your beliefs more solid, your circle of friends more comforting. But what has really changed? Only your relationship to the dream. You have not left the play. You've merely realized you are acting. Yet the play continues, and it must continue, for the universe delights in pretending to be many. Now, when I speak of the danger of outgrowing everyone around you, I do not mean that you should resist your own unfolding. The danger lies in the subtle temptation to isolate yourself, to withdraw into a quiet fortress of understanding, where no one can disturb your newly found peace. It is a very spiritual form of vanity, you see, to believe that you are done, that you have seen through the game once and for all. But the moment you think you've seen it all, life will surprise you again. Isolation feels safe because it protects your awakening from misunderstanding, but life was never meant to be understood from a distance. It was meant to be lived, messily, vulnerably, joyfully. So when you feel that separation, when you feel you have outgrown others, the invitation is not to retreat into superiority, but to rediscover compassion. For when you truly understand the dream, you stop blaming anyone for being asleep. You see that the sleeper and the awakened are both expressions of the same vast consciousness, simply wearing different masks at different times. Let us not forget, you too have played the part of the sleeper, and perhaps will again. Growth is not a one-way escalator to enlightenment. It is a tide, moving in and out. Sometimes we are wise, sometimes foolish, sometimes expansive, sometimes small. And each movement has its own grace. It is like breathing. You cannot only inhale, you must exhale too. Now, you may find that as you expand, the world mirrors that expansion in unexpected ways. New people appear, seemingly out of nowhere, those who vibrate at a similar frequency, who meet you not with resistance but with recognition. They may not look like what you expected, but they will feel like home in a new language. Life has a way of filling every void with new music, if only you stop clinging to the silence left behind. But there is a deeper wisdom still, that even those you think you've outgrown have something to teach you. Their presence can reveal the subtle remnants of your own ego, the places in you that still crave validation or secretly judge. For as long as anyone irritates you, you are not yet free of them. When you can sit among those who do not understand you and still feel love, not pity, not distance, but love, then you have not outgrown them. You have simply grown through them. You see, the flower does not apologize for blooming, nor does it mock the bud for still being closed. It simply opens, and by its very being, it invites others to open too. That is the real art of growth. To radiate without preaching, to be yourself without resistance, to live so authentically that your presence alone becomes a quiet invitation. But there will be seasons of solitude. They are not punishments, they are periods of gestation. The soil must rest before the next seed takes root. So if you find yourself walking alone, do not rush to fill the silence. Walk slowly. Listen. The stillness is speaking. It may tell you that your loneliness is not a void, but a space, a sacred space where new understanding can take form. It may whisper that your sense of separation is simply the mind's way of translating expansion. You are not leaving others behind. You are expanding so wide that the old boundaries no longer hold. And so, the danger of outgrowing everyone is not that you will end up alone, but that you will mistake your aloneness for isolation. For in truth, when you expand far enough, you begin to see that everyone is within you. The boundaries dissolve, and what once felt like distance reveals itself as depth. When you understand that, you no longer need to outgrow anyone. You simply see them as different expressions of the same awakening, playing their part in the cosmic drama. But perhaps you still wonder, what then is the purpose of relationship? If every soul is ultimately one, why bother staying connected at all? That is where the real beauty lies. Relationship is how the one remembers itself as many. It is how consciousness tastes its own flavor. Without the other, there is no mirror. Without difference, there is no dance. And so, as we continue this reflection, let us explore what it means to remain connected, to love without clinging, to walk beside others without demanding that they walk at your pace, to walk beside others without demanding they match your stride. This is one of the quietest and most difficult arts of living, for we are creatures of rhythm, and when our rhythm changes, we instinctively seek others who move to the same beat. Yet life, being mischievous as it is, often pairs us with those who seem out of sync, those whose pace forces us to listen more deeply, to soften, to yield. It is in these moments that we learn patience, not the brittle patience of waiting for others to catch up, but the supple patience of seeing that there is nowhere to go. When you understand that life has no finish line, that awakening has no final destination, you stop trying to synchronize everyone to your measure. You begin instead to hear the deeper rhythm, the pulse of existence itself, and realize that every being is perfectly timed within it. You do not rush a rose to bloom, nor scold a seed for not being a tree. You let them be, for you sense the intelligence in their unfolding. And this is how we must learn to be with one another, as gardeners, not judges, to nourish what is present rather than lament what is not. Now, sometimes as you expand, your path will simply diverge from others. The friendship, the partnership, the community, they may begin to dissolve, not out of conflict, but out of natural completion. Like a tide retreating from the shore, their time in your life ebbs away, and it hurts, because endings, no matter how graceful, always bruise the heart. But if you listen closely, you will hear that endings are not a punishment. They are the rhythm of renewal. Just as the leaf must fall for the tree to rest, relationships, too, must sometimes release their form for love to take new shapes. The real danger lies in resisting this rhythm, in clutching at what wishes to move on, in holding tight to what has already served its purpose. For when you hold too tightly, you do not preserve love, you strangle it. Love, you see, is not possession, it is participation. It is the freedom to be in the same space as another and yet allow them to be utterly themselves. But we confuse love with attachment, just as we confuse growth with departure. We think that to evolve means to escape, to rise above. Yet the deeper you grow, the more you see that above and below were never real directions. They were metaphors for a deeper intimacy, an intimacy not of bodies, but of being. And so, to truly outgrow no one, you must grow into everyone. You must see that even those who resist you are not obstacles, but reflections of your own unfinished understanding. When you encounter someone who cannot meet you where you are, that is life showing you the remnants of your own rigidity, the places where you still need to soften. For in truth, every person you meet is your mirror. Some mirrors flatter, some distort, and some show you things you would rather not see. But all of them, without exception, are fragments of yourself. You may say, but I've become so different from them. I can't relate anymore. And I would say, good. You are not meant to relate in the same way forever. The child cannot relate to the toys it once loved as it did before. But that doesn't mean it despises them. It simply sees them for what they were, instruments of play that taught it something precious. Each relationship, no matter how brief or painful, teaches you something about yourself. And when you have learned the lesson, it is not betrayal to move on. It is gratitude in motion. To cling is to deny that lesson its completion. To let go is to honor it. Now let's look at the word outgrowing again. It suggests verticality, a movement upward beyond. But perhaps growth is not a ladder at all. Perhaps it is a widening, a blooming outward into ever greater inclusivity. For what is the mark of true growth? It is not that you see more than others, but that you see others more clearly. The awakened heart does not separate, it embraces. It looks at the world with eyes unclouded by judgment and says, "Ah, this too." That's why the sages and mystics of all traditions speak with such gentleness. They are not preaching, they are playing. They see that even folly has its place, that confusion is part of the divine comedy. And when you begin to see that, when you can laugh with the universe at its own disguises, you stop taking your growth so seriously. You stop measuring it, stop defending it, stop comparing it. You simply live, and living itself becomes your teaching, your art, your offering. So, when you feel you have outgrown everyone, perhaps it is not a sign of finality, but a calling to expand your compassion, to find new ways of connecting, new ways of listening. There is a humility in realizing that no matter how awake you feel, there is always more to learn from the ordinary, from the simple, from the everyday. You may have touched vast cosmic truths, glimpsed the nature of self and illusion, but can you still enjoy a conversation about the weather? Can you still sit with your grandmother as she tells the same stories again and again and listen as if for the first time? That too is enlightenment. For awakening that cannot laugh with the ordinary has not yet fully awakened. The universe itself is infinitely ordinary. Sunlight on leaves, the sound of rain, the breath that moves in and out of your lungs without effort. To live spiritually is not to abandon the ordinary, but to see it as sacred. So if you've found yourself outgrowing others, do not rush to escape them. Be the space in which their being is allowed to unfold. Be the patience that invites their becoming. You may find one day that what you thought you had outgrown was only another layer of yourself asking to be understood. And perhaps, just perhaps, those you thought you'd left behind were not behind at all, but walking a different road to the same mountain. The view, when you reach the summit, is the same for everyone. Only the paths differ. It is a strange and humbling revelation when you realize that every path, no matter how winding or absurd, leads toward the same summit. Some stumble through the forest, some stride across the open plain, some crawl through the mud of suffering, but all are, in their own peculiar way, making the same pilgrimage toward wholeness. And once you see that, it becomes impossible to look down on anyone, for who can say which path is better? The mountain does not prefer one route over another. It simply stands, silent and vast, letting all travelers find their own ascent. You may have walked farther in understanding, but you have not walked higher in worth. For the essence of every being, from the saint to the sinner, the wise to the foolish, is made of the same divine substance. The same consciousness peers out through every pair of eyes, plays every role, dreams every dream. When you truly feel this, arrogance dissolves. So too does loneliness. For how can you ever be lonely when every face you meet is your own reflected back in countless forms? Still, the human heart feels the ache of distance. It longs for communion, for the warmth of being met, understood, mirrored. It's one thing to know we are all one. It's another thing entirely to feel it when those around you cannot see the world as you now do. That is where the practice deepens, not in transcending your humanity, but in allowing it to be tender, to let yourself miss the old closeness, the easy laughter, the simplicity of belonging, and yet to remain open, not bitter, not closed. There is a subtle beauty in loving people who do not understand you anymore. It asks you to love without condition, to give without needing agreement, to stay kind without needing validation. That is love purified of transaction. And that perhaps is the real gift of outgrowing others. It teaches you how to love more purely. When love no longer depends on being seen or mirrored, it becomes spacious, free, like the sky that welcomes both the storm and the sun without preference. But it takes courage to stand in that space, because when you release the need to be understood, you also release the comforting illusion of control. You stop trying to manage how others perceive you, and instead you let them perceive whatever they must. You become, in a sense, transparent, a window rather than a wall. People may look through you and see whatever their own mind projects. Some will call you wise, others will call you strange. Both are reflections of them, not you. The moment you stop defending who you are, you discover a marvelous freedom. You no longer need to convince anyone of anything. You simply are. And in that being, a certain peace arises, a peace that no agreement, no validation can ever give. You see, much of our suffering comes from our secret hope that others will one day catch up, that they'll finally see what we see. But that expectation is itself a form of attachment. It subtly says, my happiness depends on your understanding. Yet the truth of awakening is that it depends on nothing. It is self-luminous. It shines by its own light. When you stand in that light, even those who misunderstand you become part of its radiance. For misunderstanding, too, is an aspect of the cosmic play, the dance of opposites through which awareness discovers itself. But let's be honest, it's still lonely sometimes, isn't it? There are evenings when you sit quietly, remembering the laughter of old friends, the ease of belonging, and a part of you aches for that simplicity again. Do not run from that ache. Sit with it. Feel it fully. That ache is love longing to know itself more deeply. It is the echo of the eternal trying to find companionship within its own infinity. Loneliness, when met with awareness, becomes solitude, and solitude, when fully accepted, becomes communion with everything. For when you sit alone in silence and truly listen, you begin to hear the whole universe whispering through the stillness, the hum of existence, the pulse of stars, the breath of the wind, and suddenly you realize you were never alone. You were simply tuning to a frequency that few can yet hear. Now, let us speak of the most beautiful paradox of all. When you no longer need anyone to meet you, people begin to meet you everywhere. When you no longer demand resonance, you find it effortlessly. Because your openness becomes a kind of gravity. It draws in kindred souls, not through effort, but through alignment. And these new connections, when they come, will not be based on need, but on recognition. There will be no tugging, no convincing. It will feel like two mirrors facing each other, infinite reflection, effortless harmony. But do not rush toward that. Let it come naturally, as all things do when they are ready. Your task is simply to remain open, undefended, and curious. To walk your path, not in arrogance, but in wonder. For if you cling to the idea that you have outgrown others, you have only built another identity, the enlightened one, the awake one, and this too becomes a prison. You may not notice the bars, for they are made of gold, but they are bars nonetheless. Real freedom has no identity at all. It does not need to be awakened or grown. It simply is. And from that freedom flows a new kind of relationship with the world. Not the relationship of comparison, but of communion. You can walk through a marketplace, a crowded street, a family dinner, and see divinity shimmering through every interaction, even the awkward, the mundane, the ordinary. The shopkeeper, the bus driver, the friend who still gossips about trivial things, all of them are the universe, disguised and delighting in its own play. When you live from that realization, you no longer outgrow anyone. You simply meet them as they are, and in doing so, you help them remember what they already are. Not through teaching, not through words, but through presence. Your very being becomes the teaching. And perhaps that is the final secret, that growth, in the deepest sense, is not about separation, but return, not about rising above, but falling back into the ocean of life that has been carrying you all along. When the river of growth finally brings you home, you begin to see that you were never really moving at all. You were being moved. Life was carrying you, sometimes through storm, sometimes through sunlight, toward an understanding so simple that it almost feels like forgetting. You see, in the beginning, we seek growth as though it were a kind of conquest. We wish to awaken, to transcend, to become wiser, freer, more real. But as the seeking deepens, it begins to turn in upon itself, until one day you realize there is no you apart from life that could ever awaken. Life awakens through you, as you, and sometimes despite you. And that realization softens everything. You stop fighting the current. You stop measuring yourself against those around you. You stop trying to outgrow or keep up or let go. Instead, you begin to float, not in passivity, but in trust. For trust is the flowering of wisdom. It is the deep knowing that everything and everyone is unfolding exactly as they must. That every person in your life, even those you think you've outgrown, is part of the same mysterious choreography of becoming. Think of the way the forest grows. Each tree rises at its own pace. Some shoot up quickly to the light, others linger in the shade for decades. Yet together they form one living organism. Roots intertwined beneath the soil, exchanging breath, sharing water. The tall tree shelters the young saplings. The old fallen log nourishes new life. And so it is with us. When you understand that, the need to separate disappears. You no longer say, I've outgrown them. You say instead, we are growing together in different ways. For the truth is, you never leave anyone behind. You simply change how you relate to them. Perhaps you no longer share the same interests, the same worldview, the same energy, but that does not mean love has ended. Love is not confined to similarity. It thrives in diversity. It is the ability to hold space for difference without closing the heart. To outgrow everyone, then, is to be challenged to love everyone more deeply, not because they reflect you, but because they are you in another form. Now, one might ask, if all of this is so, if growth is not separation, then why does it so often feel lonely? Because growth strips away the false forms of connection before it reveals the true ones. It dismantles the comfortable illusions we build around belonging. We cling to sameness, mistaking it for love. We cling to agreement, mistaking it for harmony. But real belonging is not about agreement, it is about presence. It is about being so deeply rooted in what you are that you can meet another without needing them to be anything different. And that kind of belonging cannot be found through conformity. It is discovered through the courage to stand alone. Loneliness, therefore, is not your enemy. It is the chrysalis from which genuine relationship is born. You see, the person who has truly come to peace with their solitude can never again be lonely, for they have learned to find company in everything. In the whisper of wind through the trees, in the laughter of strangers, in the silent gaze of the stars, they have discovered that the world itself is a friend, a living, breathing mirror that meets them everywhere they go. When you reach this state, the idea of outgrowing everyone begins to sound strange, almost comical. How could the ocean outgrow its waves? How could the sky outgrow its clouds? You realize that everyone, from the most lost to the most luminous, is part of the same movement of life, expressing itself in infinite degrees of awareness. And so, you no longer judge, you no longer compare, you no longer hurry. Instead, you begin to celebrate. You see beauty where before you saw folly. You see innocence where before you saw ignorance. You see the divine game, the great play of hide and seek, in which consciousness hides itself inside each being, only to rediscover itself through their awakening. And this recognition brings with it a deep, abiding laughter, the laughter of one who has finally stopped taking the drama so seriously. You may find yourself smiling for no reason, feeling affection for people you once found difficult, grateful for experiences that once brought you pain, because now you understand every moment, pleasant or painful, was the universe nudging you toward this seeing. Even the heartbreak of outgrowing others was part of the lesson, to teach you that love cannot be confined to closeness, that understanding does not depend on agreement, that growth is not a competition, but a communion. So what does one do now, having come this far? Nothing in particular. You live, you listen, you laugh, you allow. You no longer try to orchestrate growth, yours or anyone else's. You simply participate in it like a musician improvising within a melody that has no end. Sometimes you will contract, sometimes you will expand, sometimes you will feel connected, other times achingly separate. But even that oscillation is part of the music, because the dance of life is not meant to be solved, it is meant to be danced. And if you can remember that, if you can meet each moment not as an obstacle, but as an expression of the infinite, then even the feeling of outgrowing becomes sacred. For it reminds you that you are alive, evolving, responsive. That consciousness is moving through you as a river moves through the land, shaping new valleys, carving new forms, bringing new life. The trick is to remain supple, to let the water flow without trying to contain it. And perhaps that is the final danger of outgrowing others. Not that you will leave them behind, but that you will become rigid in your idea of who you are now. The moment you say, I am awakened, you have fallen asleep again. The moment you believe you are finished, the universe smiles and begins your next lesson. Growth, you see, is endless, because life itself is endless. So let the journey continue. Let it unfold without hurry, without resistance. Let it take you wherever it will. And along the way, love those who walk beside you, whether they seem awake or asleep, near or far, for each one of them is a reflection of the same mystery that breathes your breath and beats your heart. If you can do that, if you can live from that seeing, then you will never again fear outgrowing anyone, because you will have realized the ultimate truth, that you cannot outgrow what you are. You are the totality of life itself, dreaming, discovering, and remembering itself endlessly, through the dance of relationship, through the rhythm of separation and return, through the infinite play of being. And when that truth dawns upon you, all sense of distance disappears. There are no others left to outgrow, no selves left to defend. There is only the vast luminous presence of now, playing at being you and me and everyone you've ever known. So rest there. Let the wind move through you. Let the world be what it is. You have not outgrown anyone. You have simply awakened to the timeless communion that was always here, waiting beneath the noise of becoming. And in that silence you will find what you were seeking all along. Not superiority, not solitude, but the exquisite simplicity of being one with all things.